Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Could I ask you to take your seats up there? Our next session this afternoon is the African Continental Free Trade Area, Issues, Challenges and Prospects, to be moderated by Honorable Clare Akamanzi. Honorable Clare is an international trade and investment lawyer who is currently the CEO of Rwanda Development Board and a cabinet member. She has served the government of Rwanda in several senior positions for the last 19 years. She was a young global leader of the World Economic Forum and was named one of Africa's top 50 powerful women for Forbes magazine in 2020. In early 2020, Akamanzi was appointed as a founding board member of the World Health Organization Foundation. She also recently was appointed as an advisory member of the Global Innovation Index, GII. Ms. Akamanzi is the Harvard Kennedy School MPA alumni and also holds an LLM, International Trade and Investment, from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. Please join me in welcoming Honorable Clare Akamanzi to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. Colonel Rivanga said I've been working for 19 years. I thought he should say I started at 19 as well. But allow me to invite the rest of the panelists. I'll start with Secretary General. Wamkele Mene, please come over. His Excellency Wamkele was elected by the 33rd Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government of the African Union to the position of Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area and has been a custodian of driving Africa's integration. The second panelist that I'd like to invite is Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry of Rwanda, Dr. Jean-Chrysostome Ngabitsinze, Minister of Trade and Industry of Rwanda. The minister has had several ministerial positions, most recently as Minister of State of Agriculture, and now the Minister of Trade and Industry of Rwanda. I also want now to invite the Governor of the Central Bank of Rwanda, Honorable John Rwangombwa, who is currently the Central Bank Governor, but has also served in several government positions in Rwanda, including as the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning. Allow me now to achieve some more gender balance and invite Mama Keita. Mama Keita is the Director of the Sub-Regional Office of the East Africa of the United Nations Commission, United Nations Economic Commission of Africa, and she has worked in the field of development economics for over 20 years. Welcome, Mama Keita. Finally, I'd like to invite Mr. Jean-Guy Africa. Mr. Jean-Guy Africa is the Acting Director of the Regional Integration Coordination Office of the African Development Bank and has had extensive experience in issues to do with trade, infrastructure finance, project management, and investment. So welcome to this eminent panel. I hope that you're all ready to listen and interact with the panel, especially after such a sumptuous lunch that you're all coming from. But allow me to begin by asking the very basic question: what is the African Continental Free Trade Area? We've heard many things about it. We've heard that it's an ambitious initiative that will significantly boost intra-African trade, which today stands at about 16% from the latest data of 2020, but which is expected to grow to up to 52% with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We've also heard that the FCFTA will lead to the development of Africa's long sought after industrialization, development of regional value chains, creating meaningful and productive jobs, and generally increase the social economic well-being of the African continent. Now, my first question to the panelists is, where you sit, what does the African Continental Free Trade Area mean to you? I'll start with you, Secretary General Wamkele.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the government of Rwanda and the Rwanda Defense Force for inviting me to this symposium. I have to confess, I was curious when I was told that the Defense Force would like to hear about trade, but I think it is critical that this discussion should happen in the context of security questions that Africa has to confront. Trade, peace, security are all in tandem. The AFCFTA is a free trade area, which today the agreement establishing the free trade area has been ratified by 47 countries. And only one country in Africa has not signed the agreement. And the reason for the AFCFTA is really very basic. Since the end of colonialism, the African continent has been at the periphery of the global economy. There are a number of reasons why that is. Market fragmentation, smallness of our national economies, 42 currencies in Africa, lack of industrial base, lack of manufacturing capacity, and then, of course, the ever-present over-reliance on the export of primary commodities. You consider all of these factors, the result is Africa's contribution to global trade is 2.1%. Africa's contribution to global GDP and output is 3.5% or 3.3%. And when you compare the contribution of Africa to the global economy and to global trade, you compare it to Singapore, a city, an island, 6.5% is their contribution to global trade. So clearly, something had to be done to integrate the market, to create a consolidated market that will enable Africa to industrialize, to compete internationally in the international economy, and to create jobs. So the free trade area, the objective is to consolidate this market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. We were here in Kigali in 2018 in this convention center to sign the agreement establishing the AFCFTA. And what was very, very clear amongst the heads of states who were here was that all of us waited far too long for Africa to get to the point of taking steps towards an integrated economy. This 3.4 trillion United States dollars market that I refer to, if the African continent is not consolidated into a single market, will remain nothing but a number. And the projections by the Brookings Institute in the US are that by the year 2035, Africa's economy is set and projected to be close to 7 trillion United States dollars, combined consumer spending and GDP, consumer spending and business spending. Again, that will remain elusive, that projection, if we don't consolidate the market, create value chains that will spread across the African continent so that we compete as a united, integrated economy to leverage on the scale that we have. So this is the the proposition of the AFCFTA, it goes more than just, and it has to, it goes more than just trading in goods, transit of goods, and all of these elements are of course important, but if you listened to all of the statements of the heads of states here in March in 2018, the objective is the competitiveness of Africa's economy, to create jobs, innovation, and then of course the result is a peaceful continent. We have taken those steps in the last 5 years under the leadership of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government towards implementation of the AFCFTA. And I'm happy that we have made good progress, even when there were challenges that were presented by COVID-19, the geopolitical context that we're all aware of, peace and security, instability in some places on the continent, but we have made very, very good progress.
Thank you. I think what I've heard from you is, to you, the AFCFTA means consolidation of the African markets, integration and unity for trade. I'll now move to the Minister of Trade and Industry. What does the AFCFTA mean to you, Minister?
Yeah, thank you, Clare. I thank the RDF community to invite me here today to talk about the innovations we have had last 5 years having CFTA as an area of economic justice, not economic utility. I mean economic justice because by definition usually people think a free trade is equal to wealth and income generation. It is totally different. Economic bloc and a free trade area is a way of creating equal opportunities. So it's a justice way. Thank you.
Interesting, the way you put it. The AFCFTA to you means economic justice. Interesting. And now move on to the governor, central bank, Mr. John Rwangombwa. As a central bank governor, what does the AFCFTA mean to you? Yeah. I hope you don't say money.
No. Yeah, thank you, Clare. I think the SG has really defined what it means. So whatever we do is just to add a few importance here and there, but overall the numbers he's given, that is what CFTA means. But beyond trade and with trade, CFTA means increasing the opportunity to attract more investment to our continent. So studies show that if we really moved into a unified trade area that creates a big market, Africa is going to increase our FDI by around between 111 and 159% by 2035. So that is a big opportunity for the continent, and it's also an opportunity to create jobs. As we all know, Africa has the youngest population globally, and I think in the interesting sessions we had here in the morning, they're talking of how we are losing our human capacity to the rest of the world because really there are no opportunities here. So with CFTA and with increased investment, we are going to create jobs and we are going to create opportunities for innovation because we are looking at a bigger market. So CFTA is really, as my colleagues have just said, is about prosperity of the African continent, is about prosperity of the African population. And with that, again, going back to what was discussed here in the morning, if we were to work as one block, as one economic block, it also gives us political power. It also gives us negotiating power globally. So this balkanization of our continent as small markets, as small nations, with a unified market, we can really be at the table and talk. And we know today, you can't talk of economic prosperity or economic growth if you don't have a bigger market. And whatever much you can do looking at the outside world, focusing on exports, I think we all know that China today, I think, is the biggest exporting country in the world. But they have built that mass starting with their own population. So we need to start with ourselves to think of, there are also numbers talking about our exports will increase, but I think it's key to create that market here and be able to grow our continent. Thank you.
Thank you, John. What I've heard from you is opportunity, prosperity, political power. That's what the ESFTA mean, if I'm to summarize from what you've said. Mama Keita?
Thank you very much, moderator. You know, at ECA, really the mandate that we set for ourselves is to promote structural transformation of our economies in Africa. African economies are vulnerable just because of the very structure of those economies, relying on the export of very small number of exports, and those exports are sent abroad in a raw form, no local transformation, no value addition. And this is preventing the economies from creating decent jobs that is needed to bring about prosperity that we need in this continent. And for us, the AFCFTA is the tool for that. It is the agenda for that. We have called AFCFTA the Marshall Plan for Africa in the aftermath of the multiple crises that the continent has experienced and is still experiencing, actually, COVID, and then the Ukraine shock, and also the climate crisis. And then this has shown that our economies are extremely vulnerable, and the solution is structural transformation. It is industrialization. And then AFCFTA is going to be able to bring that and to create those jobs. And some important factor for industrialization include actually big market, volume. For people to have the intention to invest, they need to know that they can have economies of scale and have a big market. African economies are small, purchasing power is very low in many of these economies, and only by aggregating this market, we can create a significant demand for the investment that the continent needs to promote this industrialization. So it is a tool, again, or a mean to promote industrialization and to create the jobs and bring about prosperity.
Thank you. Structural transformation, Marshall Plan for Africa. It's the agenda for prosperity. Thank you, Mama Keita. And now I'll invite Jean-Guy to also share his view or what he understands the AFCFTA to mean from where he sits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. For us at the African Development Bank, and for me personally, the AFCFTA is very much a precondition to development. And, you know, the very little I know about military science is that I want to start with some stats on the geography. You know, in military science, you always map the terrain. So let me start with the geography of why the AFCFTA matters. Africa, the landmass, covers nearly 30 million square kilometers. 30 million square kilometers. Europe, the wider Europe, if you include the western part of Russia, and you stretch all the way to the Caspian Sea, is 10 million square kilometers. The EU, if you're only counting the 27 countries, is 4 million square kilometers. So Africa is massive, massive. Now, still on the geography, still on mapping the terrain, out of these 55 AU countries, you have 16 of them that are landlocked. So 2/3 of Africa is landlocked, which means higher transport costs, higher trading costs, just much more difficult to do business. That's on the geography. Let's get into the demographics. Africa has one of the lowest population densities of any region on the continent. There are more than 18 countries that have fewer than 5 million people. 5 million people. Imagine trying to build industries with markets that small. And we only have a dozen countries that have more than 50 million. We can list them here: DRC, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, Tanzania, Egypt. Only one that has more than 200 million people, Nigeria. The SG referred to our stats and the proportion that Africa represents in terms of global production, less than 3%. In terms of global trade, less than 3%. So when you look into all these factors, the AFCFTA becomes inevitably a precondition if we are to develop. We need bigger markets so that our industries can get economies of scale. We need bigger markets so that the goods, the services, the capital, and people can flow freely. So for me, it's really turning this relatively difficult terrain to our advantage. That's what the AFCFTA means to me, a precondition to development.
A precondition for development. And you also touched on the massive landscape and the demographics that require us to, free trade, for trade to flow much more freely than is the case today. Now, when I heard how each of you described the Continental Free Trade Area and what it means to you, the words that I heard was consolidation of markets, economic justice, opportunity, political power, prosperity, structural transformation, precondition for development. And when I heard the numbers that SG Wamkele, you shared, we account for about 3% of almost everything: trade, production, FDI, among others. So it seems that this big opportunity that the CFTA is an aspiration. Compared to where we are today, it's something that we aspire to be. My next question to SG Wamkele is it going to happen in our lifetime? And you heard we've been working for almost 20 years. So
I think that when we look at the ambition, it may appear that it is not going to happen in our lifetime. If we look at purely how ambitious implementation of the AFCFTA and integration of the market, the task is enormous. So it may appear too daunting and that we won't be able to achieve the objective. However, if you look at, let's look at the European Union. 1947, 1948, coming out of the Second World War, the European Union as we know it today started as, including the single monetary zone, started as the European Coal and Steel Pact. You fast forward 70, 72 years later, you have an integrated market, a single market that is globally competitive. I think it proves that it can be done. If you look at, rightly, the governor mentioned China and how China actually similarly populated as the African continent, consolidated a market. For their first probably 20, 25 years after the reforms that were introduced in China by Deng Xiaoping, China was not actually exporting at that time, was focusing on consolidating the domestic market to ensure that they were competitive domestically and created innovation domestically, and then, rightly as the governor said, started exporting. Once they were able to achieve economies of scale in the domestic economy, in the domestic market. So the point is, and that happened in less than a generation, less than a generation. If we are able to do that as Africans, to consolidate a domestic market, meaning the AFCFTA, and we focus on specific value chains, I believe that it can be done. Jean-Guy mentioned population growth. By the turn of this century, 1 in 4 working people in the world will be African. That's an opportunity for us to work towards building a market and creating jobs for young Africans. And quite frankly, we know the challenges of our continent. We know that not every single country will be able to implement the AFCFTA. However, there are anchor countries that we must rely on to drive implementation because there are challenges at national level. So I think it can be done if we are in a position to aggressively accelerate the implementation of the AFCFTA. We are coming out of the World Bank IMF spring meetings. They presented a report on the AFCFTA, that is to say the World Bank, and the report projects actually that by the year 2035 is where, if we implement the AFCFTA, is where we have an opportunity to lift 100 million Africans out of poverty, moderate poverty and abject poverty. 2035, precisely. So the point is, if we are disciplined enough and we take concrete steps to implement the agreement to reduce barriers to intra-Africa investment, which is at 4%, and to make sure that we attract, as was said earlier, we attract specific investment that drives our industrialization. We were here last year, I mentioned this morning, we were here last year when the President, His Excellency the President, opened the first mRNA vaccine production facility in Africa. That kind of industrial development is what we need to see those results by the year 2035. And if we can establish an integrated value chain, whether it's the auto sector, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, I believe it can be done.
I'll follow up with a question. If you look at the Charter of the Organization of African Unity, as far back as that, regional integration for trade has always been an ambition, but there's been insufficient success over the years. And one of the factors of that has been insufficient political will across African leaders. Do you see a change in political will, and do you see a critical mass of voices that can actually sustain this ambition to fruition?
Yes, absolutely. I see a change. The first summit of heads of states that I attended, after the political discussions, most of them left, went back to their countries. But today, at every summit, the heads of states remain for a discussion on trade and investment. And not just a discussion, an action plan for how do we take this vision forward. And AFCFTA is one of them, NEPAD, and other instruments that the AU has introduced. The political will certainly is there. I mentioned at the beginning 47 countries that have ratified the agreement, only one country that has not signed. That to me is a very, very strong demonstration of political will. When we often get asked, well, how were you able to move so quickly in less than 5-6 years? You have the legal foundations of a free trade area. And my answer is always that it is political will. We reached this far because our heads of states, sharing a common vision, are determined to make sure that, that this becomes a reality. There has been a shift, absolutely.
Thank you. I'll now move to the Minister of Trade of Rwanda. Minister, you had what SG Wamkele just ended with. I think the fact that the agreement of the African Continental Free Trade Area was signed here in Kigali demonstrates political will. My question to you, are you ready to trade? Is Rwanda ready?
Yeah, thank you, Clare. Rwanda, we are trading, but I want to go back in order to elaborate more, so then I will be able to demonstrate. Even before 2018 March, when the head of state, some of them, put a signature to the agreement creating AFCFTA. If you see the policing, strategizing of Rwanda, our Vision 2020, even other strategies we have, we not see Rwanda talking itself. Rwanda always talk integration at regional, at continental, and at global level. So meaning that the political will, leadership we have is ready. So if that is ready, meaning that the equation will be very simple to resolve. So to trade will become more easy because we facilitated. After 2018, after the signature, then the Ministers of Trade and other ministries have been engaged on the process of creating enabling environment for trade. We have participated on the protocols, have seen negotiations, discussions. What I can say was not easy. Not easy, not for Rwanda, but for all other countries. Do you know why? Because a free trade area at the beginning creates a fear. A fear because there is an opportunity cost. You must leave. There's a sacrifice. Sacrifice because in the short run, we have to adjust what we do in terms of costing in order to arrive to a long run gain or benefit. So that fear is available until now, and you will see it later perhaps as a challenge. But regarding Rwanda, from the beginning, we have been able to demonstrate that we are ready. Last year, end October, we have been selected to be one of 8 countries to be part of Guided Trade Initiative, the piloting phase. I was there in Ghana after my nomination. We had 2 commodities, coffee and tea, but you were there, and other countries were there too, to see that is it possible to trade under rules of origin. Is it possible, even if sometimes it can require more effort and investment. Then after that, we have been discussing how can we host adjustment fund to facilitate investment. Rwanda has been able to be selected. On March this year, you have signed to host the fund. Okay, do you think we are not ready? May I continue? Yes, I can even continue. Now, where we are today as today, next month we will host the Ministerial Council and Trade Guide Initiative. After Ghana, will be Rwanda. So I think we are ready. Of course, to be ready is not in terms only of qualitative side, even quantitative side. We are creating a possibility to increase what we do in terms of productivity and productions. We are engaging our private sector and other institutions. From last year, October, we are in campaign awareness. We want to call Rwandans and all friends and people who want to trade with Rwanda to tell them that we are ready to facilitate, because we have accepted to lose in the short run and to gain in long run. That by principle is what we call free trade area. So if I go with tangible examples, let's see, for example, the sector of agriculture, because it's a sector where many countries in Africa are interested to trade with, because it's the first sector we can say our population are engaged. We want and we see it possible with the blessing of Secretariat and the Ministerial Council. Last Ministerial Council approved that we can think about agreed trade strategy. HE approved it, our president. I want to champion on that, to make sure that we can facilitate the way we do business and create a channel, a logistic hub capable to facilitate things. It's not easy, as I have said, but it is possible. Because if we can be able at least be self-sufficient on food security, everything will be easy. Let's give you an example. Now we are struggling with inflation. The big part is food inflation. Our country is a net importer in terms of intra-trade in Africa. But if you see the struggle we have to be able to move maize from Zambia, for example, or maize from Tanzania, so we still have cross-border issues we can deal with. But in Rwanda, we think it's possible. We think it's possible through the protocols we have approved, we have accepted. We have protocol on investment, on trade, on services. From there, you can have a roadmap. For that reason, we have our national strategic plan for AFCFTA. we have been among the first countries to have it. So Clare, we want to be ready, and I think we are ready. And of course, when you are in a continental free trade, even if you are ready alone, so meaning that you are not ready. The big part of countries must be ready to be able to trade. For that reason, we are prioritizing to see, is it possible to trade? What are the challenges? So as a nation who is included in the model, we are in, we will stay in, and of course, we suffer together with our brothers and sisters, but at the end, we win together. Thank you.
So at the national level, Honorable Minister, you've talked about what Rwanda is doing, engaging the private sector, creating awareness, and trying to make them understand that there's an opportunity and they should take care of it. If I'm a farmer in Karongi, and I've heard about the AfCFTA, and I'm growing coffee, and I hear there's a big opportunity in Nigeria. I've never been to Nigeria. Maybe I've never been out of Rwanda. Practically, how do you help me from Karongi as Minister of Trade to even begin to navigate a market like Nigeria that I've never heard about? I probably don't even speak a language that is spoken in that country. Practically, how are we helping such cases?
No, thank you so much. I've said it very well. Is a farmer, is in production. Production is the first step of value chain and supply chain. So what we do with that farmer, we connect with the farmer, with the companies who are trading, because everyone along the value chain must accomplish efficiently the work he or she is doing. That farmer must increase the production and the quality, mainly the quality of that product, because through rules of origin, we have what we call certificate of quality. So to be able to arrive at that, so you have to support the farmers through extensions, through the work he's doing or she's doing. It's not necessary to go in Ghana. We'll send the product in Ghana for her or for him. Thank you.
So it's practically working with the farmers, practically working with traders to help them understand the market that they're developing and trying to go to. Maybe I'll come back to you before I finish with the Minister, SG Wamkele. Okay. What are you doing at the Continental Free Trade Area to actually link up traders across countries so they get to know each other, to bring the awareness that the Minister was talking about?
We just had the AfCFTA Business Forum last month, which attracted small, medium enterprises, including those that are in the agricultural sector. This year, we will launch the Africa Trade Gateway, a digital tool that will enable connectivity of SMEs. It will provide market intelligence, information, payments, information, customs procedures, so that a trader or an exporter or an economic operator who is in Malawi can trade with an SME and enter into trade transactions with an SME in Egypt through digital platforms. So we are deploying these digital tools to ensure that we broaden access to the market and we broaden access to information about the AfCFTA. That Africa Trade Gateway will be launched by the end of the year by ourselves and Afrexim Bank, which is a very important tool for enabling market access. Similarly, in the area of agriculture, we have started a partnership with AGRA, because AGRA, of course, is the well-placed agency for providing market information for agricultural products. As the Honorable Minister was saying, Rwanda has introduced, which was adopted by all ministers, now it is a position of the African Union, introduced an initiative on accelerating trade in agricultural products. And one of the opportunities that we have there is to bring in smallholder farmers to be part of, whether they are in the form of cooperatives, but to bring in smallholder farmers so that they can be part of AfCFTA implementation. That too will require dissemination of information. And so AGRA, as well as the relevant commission in the African Union and NEPAD will be very important partners for that initiative.
I think an important topic is digitization, and you come back to what the Minister said, you don't have to even trade. If we develop digital tools that can allow trade to happen, that will be one of the ways to expedite the Continental Free Trade Area. I'll come back to you, Honorable Minister. Yes. What do you consider the top 3 challenges that business people have to deal with in order to trade more successfully within the African continent?
Yeah, thank you so much, Clare. The first one is the geographical and political fragmentation we are having, even when we are discussing to approve some documents. Unfortunately, we still have sisters and brothers thinking that a free trade area is just a political thought. And these bring region blocks to block the continental one. This is a challenge, but as I have said, is a process. And the political fragmentation, because some consider the size. Usually, economically saying, efficiency is not equal to size. Efficiency is equal to the way you do things. And unfortunately, some take the size as a country to block what they call small ones. But is not the principle of free trade. This is a challenge. The second one is tariff and non-tariff barriers. There are too many. I can give you an example. If I have, for example, tomorrow to go to attend a meeting in a country in Central Africa or in Western Africa, we still have the visa requirements. And sometimes the time we spend searching for a visa, okay, I'm a policy maker, I can be facilitated. But think about a business who has an order to send in Uganda or to go to Uganda to discuss with other business community or to go in Niger. So that is another challenge. You are not free to move. And this even correlates negatively to the move of goods. If people can't move, you understand, the goods will not move because those goods are coming from the people. This is another challenge I see. The second one is what I call the fear. The fear regarding the short run and the long run effects from the cost to implement a free trade agreement. At the beginning, for the first, let's say, a short run between 0 and 5 years, the costs are huge because you have to adjust. Because you have the tariffs to be reduced, you have to eliminate some taxes or to agree. So there is a cost of adjustment. That cost of adjustment is seen by many countries as a loss. Then the traditional economists, as I have to use to call them, they think protection is a solution. But protection will never be a solution. Protection is a negative thought in terms of implementing a free trade area like this. So a negative thought never creates positive actions. So when you protect too much, you are creating negative actions, and that is very bad. So we can call our nations not protect too much. You can see now examples around Africa. During the crisis we are passing through, the war in Ukraine, the COVID, people have crossed the stock of grains, crossed the stock of fuel, thinking they're doing well. But no, they are losing money because the time, speed, in terms of economy, when you protect, you stop and you lose a lot. So protection is another challenge and is not good. So you can say government must open, then they can calculate how they open progress value. Another one I want to talk about is the long run benefit. The long run benefit require patience. And the patience is not able to model. You can't model patience. A person who is patient, you can see when he will be able to have a gain. But free trade area require to be patient. Patience meaning that you adjust today is a structural adjustment of economy to have a gain in 10 years. Is another challenge because, as I have said, government are not saying as a way to create a wealth in the future, even long future, so they still want to do business as usual because they want a profit quickly. So this is another thing I saw through the process we are together with other on negotiation. Then the last one is a feeling, or I can call it the opinion. People has developed opinion around the CFTA saying will not work. Do you know why? Because when they take numbers to see how and with who and where Africa is trading, you will see the huge amount we are trading with external African countries because they think about the currencies. They say we trade with USA, with Europe, because we need the currencies, or we need other facilitation. And that is a problem. So I hope through the implementation, because we will have even to talk about the money value of what we do, those countries who think in a traditional way, economically saying, will become more modern and more innovative, and they will accept to lose some money today to gain more. Those are the challenges I'm saying today as someone who is together with others working on this journey. The journey I call is the right fight. To me, to fight it is okay with my country. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Mama Keita, one of the challenges the Minister elaborated was fear or protectionism. And yet we have examples of very successful regional groups that have traded over the years, ASEAN, NAFTA, EU, among others. What lessons do you think we can draw from successful regional integration groups that we can incorporate in our own agenda?
Thank you very much, moderator. Yes, it's true. There is this fear, but there is also a lot of lessons that we need to consider when pushing for this AFCFTA. I would like to start with our region here, the EAC. The EAC is a good example among the RECs who is successful based on the figures. The AAC zone has been the fastest growing region in Africa for so long, until before COVID. It was growing at an average of 6% or so. And yet it's not the richest region in terms of natural resources, by the way. So here you see the power of trade being an engine of growth and promoting investment. Still in the same EAC and COMESA zone, when you look at the FDIs here in Rwanda, the first are Mauritius and Kenya. So with a very well-functioning economic zones, you can promote intra-region investment, actually. So this is a good example that, for me, brings us to think that if we increase even more the pie, the AFCFTA can lead to more intra-regional investment and things like that. I would like to take now the example of ECOWAS. I'm from ECOWAS. With our passport, we move in 15 countries. You don't even think, I want to go to Guinea-Bissau today, I just go. I want to go to Dakar, I go. I want to go to Togo, Benin. You see, and if you are a business person, this matters because it will shorten your transaction time and also your transaction cost, hopefully. So this is another example that if in these zones we have not been afraid of opening up the borders, what is preventing the entire Africa from allowing free movement of people and goods? So this is another lesson that I think is important for us. Now, going outside Africa, the EU is also, if you look at figures, you learn that the EU has really contributed a lot to increase the GDP in the zone, but it didn't happen in short term. Yeah, it took time, and it was it contributed to really bring, how do you say this, to increase, if I can say, prosperity in some countries that were lagging behind, such as maybe Spain, Italy, Portugal. In those countries, the effect was really important, okay? So this also shows that African countries that are still reluctant, the minister was mentioning the fear, they need to be convinced that this is a tool that will help them. When you take the example of the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Area, actually it is, the biggest player there is America, the US, right? And then you have Mexico and Canada. But the one complaining most is the US, actually, to the point that the country came to put into question the agreement in the recent years, while Mexico gained a lot in terms of job creation. Same for Canada. Canada was able to increase its exports really significantly. So those small economies, excuse me for the term, but should not be that feared. And like the minister said, by the gain in openness is more than protection and closing yourself. So those are some of the lessons that we need to draw and to continue to promote for the AFCFTA to happen.
I really like how you've given us some good examples from within the continent of where integration has succeeded. You gave the example of ECOWAS and the East African community, and also some of the examples outside the African continent, EU and NAFTA. But as we talk about one market, when we have all these regional integration groups within the African continent, we have maybe 8 that have been recognized by the African Union. We have ECOWAS, ECAS, EAC, COMESA, SADC. It almost looks like a spaghetti ball of RECs. Do you think, or can you advise what needs to be done in order for the ACFTA to actually function in the midst of so many RECs already operating on the African continent? Thank you. And maybe SD Wamkele, you also want to come on that question.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're very right. I think that we have 8 official RECs, but there are more even, so something needs to be done about that. But I think that, I don't know, our decision makers need to understand that the interest of the people should prevail. And institution is there to improve governance, to improve livelihoods, not to block them. So if we have such an opportunity or an agenda, it's the first agenda that I've seen that really has convinced me about its potential to bring Africa where we, at least close to where we want it to be. So those institutions should not be the one blocking it. I think that we have learned from them. They have also grown in terms of knowledge, how to operate. For instance, COVID was very well managed among the EAC here. They provided guidelines to trucks how to move while every country was closed. So there's a lot of learning in this thing, but there should not be the obstacles to what the continent as a whole would like to be. So this being said, I would like to say that the GTI, the Guided Trade Initiative that the Secretary General mentioned recently, it's already providing some good lessons. It showed that trade can happen beyond those RECs. Here in Rwanda, you mentioned coffee, and coffee went from Rwanda to Ghana, right? So going outside the EAC zone. Some trade took place, between Egypt and other countries. Today, I think that 93 commercial transactions have taken place under the Guided Trade Initiative. Maybe the SD will again explain better what they mean by this GTI. But trade has taken place. Those initiatives have tested the feasibility of the AFCFTA, and it proved that it can happen. And I think that business people are excited about it. Just a few days ago, I was reading in the news a business person from Tanzania saying that he is preparing 8 containers to bring coffee from Tanzania to Algeria. You see, from one region to North Africa. And so he said that he is going to export 172 tons of coffee. And he said that he's planning already to bring it to 1,000 tons. Can you imagine the number of jobs that are going to be created out of that? How many life are going to be improved, all the opportunities. So these institutions should not block those opportunities for us. They need to sit and to see which role they can play in this game or agenda, but I'm sure that they can find roles and also understanding on how they can contribute along with the African Union, along with the AFCFTA Secretariat, to really make the integration, the global integration, a reality after proving its relevance at a smaller scale.
Thank you. SD Wamkele, on the one hand, the RECs have been a good example that integration works. On the other hand, how do we harmonize all these RECs in order to trade freely on the African continent? If you could share practically what we should expect.
Well, I think that the RECs will always have a function. The agreement establishing the AFCFTA is very clear that the continental free trade area builds on the acquis of the RECs. They are the building blocks. The AFCFTA is what connects the different RECs, as our colleague was saying, connecting ECOWAS with the EAC. Without the AFCFTA, EAC and ECOWAS will trade on the basis of global rules, MFN rules. And we don't want that. We want preferential trade on the continent. So the connector is the AFCFTA. The Abuja Treaty sets out a timeline for the integration, the linear integration of Africa. We are now in the phase of a free trade area. The next phase is a customs union, for an African customs union. That means that the regional economic communities, at least from the point of view of trade and investment, their mandate will have to be reconfigured to be consistent with the objective of reaching a customs union in Africa, where we have a common external tariff as the whole continent. They will remain. The RECs will remain because there are specific functions that are peculiar to each regional economic community. For example, there have been, we all know that ECOWAS experienced 3 coups d'etats last year. ECOWAS has been very, very firm and very, very strong in taking steps against unconstitutional changes of government within the regional economic community. That peace security function will always be there. But the trade and investment function, as I said, may have to be reconfigured when we have reached the next stage of integration in Africa, which is a customs union. So I see a complementarity. The spaghetti bowl effect becomes an anomaly if we're talking about trade in Africa, intra-Africa trade and intra-Africa investment, because you cannot belong to more than one customs union. Absolutely. So when we reach the stage of being a customs union, which I hope will be soon, we will have a common external tariff. EAC, ECOWAS, SACU, CIMAC, all of the regional economic communities will have to relook at that trade and investment function, whilst the other functions of the regional economic community remain. And there have been successes, again, as was said, a free movement of persons. In West Africa, in East Africa, we see a regional trade facilitation system that enables goods to move freely to an extent, I would argue more than in any other regional economic community. So these are success stories that we have to build on from each regional economic community.
I now want to bring Mr. Jean-Guy Africa. I think going by your name, you've already embraced the continent. But one of the obstacles for Africa to trade within the continent is insufficient infrastructure. When you talk about road connectivity, railways, water transportation, IT connectivity, still big challenges there. I think one time the African Development Bank said we had about $60 billion deficit of infrastructure financing. What are you doing as the African Development Bank in addressing the infrastructure gap that is crucial for the success of this agenda?
Thank you, moderator. I'd like to take this question by giving some bit of context on infrastructure and why infrastructure is really a global public good. And I'll focus here on urbanization. Why at the African Development Bank we take infrastructure so seriously. Urbanization, if you look at it, is arguably one of the most profound transformations that Africa will undergo in the 21st century. It will have economic, environmental, and societal ramifications. Since 1990, the number of African cities has doubled. And Africa now has the fastest growing rate in terms of cities. Our urban population today is short of 500 million. And our urbanization rate is approximately 40%. We've just conducted a study on urbanization, so the data is relatively recent. We are projecting the urban population to grow to about 1.3 billion by 2050, at which point we would have reached a 56% urbanization rate. At that time, there will be some 120 cities of at least 1 million people in Africa, and several megacities. Now, naturally, this presents formidable opportunities for scale Your SMEs will now have bigger markets to trade, to produce, easier to achieve economies of scale. That's on the good side. But it also comes with challenges. Millions more people to feed, millions more people to transport, millions more people to shelter. So infrastructure is absolutely critical. We must plug infrastructure gaps, because if we've got millions more people hungry, millions more people that can't be transported affordably, that can't get decent jobs, I don't need to go into the political ramification and the social ramification of this situation when we project ourselves in 2040. So for the African Development Bank, infrastructure is at the heart of what we do. We've got 5 high fives. I think many have probably heard about them. Integrate Africa, industrialize Africa, feed Africa, improve the quality of life of Africa, and empower Africa. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we've invested approximately $50 billion in infrastructure, with most of the investment going in airports, in seaports, in road, in water and sanitation, in infrastructure. But that being said, like you've mentioned, we're very far from the gap. The gap, which is usually defined as the difference between the infrastructure needs and the infrastructure commitments in a given year, is anywhere between 70 and 100 plus billion. So it's even more. And I think if we were to do another study, we'd find that with COVID, it's actually increased. Some of the challenges, from our perspective, having invested so much in infrastructure, what we see as the key challenges are usually, naturally, limited access to capital. So we've got countries with high debt levels, countries that have inadequate savings. We've got underdeveloped capital markets. The second one, which is an area where Rwanda has done superbly, is the whole issue of political and regulatory risks. The uncertainties that certain investors have when they come and invest in markets, the issues with corruption, governance, and weak enabling environments. When you look at infrastructure, and this is really important, one thing that is absolutely critical for investors is the sanctity of contracts. They need to have the feeling that infrastructure will, on average, and I'll get to that in a little bit, take you anywhere to implement, if you include the feasibility studies, up to 14 years. We're talking mega projects. So it's absolutely critical that you address issues of political and regulatory risk. The gap itself in infrastructure makes it more difficult to invest in infrastructure. If you don't have reliable power, if it's difficult to transport your inputs from point A to point B, so it's a sort of a vicious cycle. You've got another element that really plagues our ability to invest in infrastructure is issues of currency volatility, which makes debt servicing very difficult, which makes it difficult to project cash flows. You've borrowed in dollars, but you're repaying in local currencies. We've got instruments to help countries with those ones. And then the whole aspect of smart infrastructure. Investors are increasingly insisting in investing in smart infrastructure. And in a way, it raises the complexity of infrastructure, although it might make it costly in the short run. In the long run, you benefit. But it's additional complexity that is added to the equation. And the last one is project preparation. Only 10% of projects reach financial close. Only 10% in Africa. That number is really low. So we must invest more in project preparation. This will be my last point, just so that I don't go too much into the detail. I don't want to create the impression that project preparation is something simple. So it's really important for me to unpack what we mean here. When you prepare a project, it's a series of actions that can last up to 6 to 7 years just to get the project ready to where you reach financial close. You must define the project. This is the really early stage where you're doing your project information brief, you're coming up with some general concept of what you want to do. The next stage is usually a bit harder, is the pre-feasibility and the feasibility stage. And here you need to invest in doing the organizational, the financial, the technical, the environmental assessments. You need to do your project engineering design, your detailed feasibility studies. Then you move to project structuring, where you're trying to arrive at an adequate mix of debt and another element. Debt and equity, there you go. Thanks for complimenting me. Debt and equity, you want to arrive at a risk profile that interests investors, and then you move to, transaction support, where you go out to look for your investors. So I just want to highlight just how lengthy, how costly, and how challenging it can be. We intervene in all these aspects, and these are the requirements. The last one is we must crowd in private sector. Public finance is not enough to get us to the end goal, and to rope in public finance, we must address all the issues I mentioned earlier. A general recommendation that we make when dealing with, when investing in infrastructure is we encourage governments to invest in socially enriching sectors, water, sanitation, transport, where possibly pushing commercially attractive opportunities like energy towards the private sector. And systematically de-risking investment in terms of the political, the currency, and the regulatory risks. Yeah, thank you very much.
So I think you've combined both soft and hard infrastructure, soft in terms of the policies, the project preparation, feasibility studies, legal framework, among others, but also the real hard infrastructure that needs to happen. Would you speak about any innovative approaches that we can think about in terms of mobilizing more development financing to be able to deploy more than we see today on the market? Any ideas on how FDB is thinking about mobilizing new sources of money for that?
We've got two windows primarily through which we lend resources to countries and the private sector. And the bulk of the multilateral development system essentially functions this way. We've got a concessional window, which we call the African Development Fund, that where we mobilize resources from donors every 3 years and provide highly concessional resources, so either grants to governments, like grants, non-repayable grants, or loans, highly concessional loans, so with 10-year grace periods and 50-year repayment period. We've got another window, which we call the ADB window, the African Development Bank, where we mobilize resources from the capital markets, and we provide those resources either to the private sector, again on favorable terms, or to middle income countries. So these are the mechanisms that we use. I will save you the financial engineering that we're pushing inside of not only the African Development Bank, but the wider multilateral development system to basically augment our balance sheet. We do yearly, within those two windows, approximately 10 billion, but it's clear that it's not enough. We need to get the 10 billion to about 20. So there's a lot of fine-tuning, financial engineering going on within senior management to explore opportunities, working with other MDBs, including the IMF, the World Bank, to scale up the resources that we provide. I think in terms of augmenting beyond what the AFDB is doing, and increasing our financial firepower from 10 billion to say maybe 20 in the next year, we're also working with governments on issues of debt management, for example, in helping improve fiscal disciplines. We're widen the tax base, address issues of tax evasion. We are working on remittances. Africa receives quite a lot of remittances in terms of inflows, particularly from the diaspora. But if you look at the trend in the use of remittances, you see a lot of consumption. People receive money, the next month they're asking for more. So how do we, and we've been at it for almost 10 years, but we haven't really figured out how to mobilize remittances for productive use, so that it's not just consumed, and it's something that honestly we haven't figured out a solution, but we feel that the billions coming could be used for more productive for more productive uses, and we need to figure out what to do. So debt management, remittances, FDI, the whole issue of FDI, there's private capital out there. So we are working with governments to improve the enabling environment, make it easier to start a business, make it easier to obtain a permit to construct. And again, Rwanda has done incredibly well in that space, but it's not necessarily a representation of the rest of the continent. So in many countries, we are there trying to sanitize the business environment, because in so doing, it has an indirect effect in attracting more resources. So yes, the debt issue, remittances, and it's not directly correlated, but when your economy grows, you've got more resources at your disposal, your tax base increases, so it's all linked. You've got more, you can generate more revenue to service your debt. So human capital is also at the heart of what we do. We need a more healthy population, we need a more productive population, so that they can produce more, they can trade more, they can capture a bigger part of the global economy, and in so doing provide more resources for the country. So we're doing it directly and via indirect means.
Thank you, Mr. Fricka. I now want to bring the governor of the central bank. We've talked about opportunities, we've talked about trade, supporting businesses to go across the border, we've talked about building infrastructure to support trade. But there's one big topic, which is payments. At the end of the day, if I am an exporter sitting in Kigali dealing with Rwandan francs, my costs in Rwandan francs, and I want to export to 5 countries, I'm probably going to deal with 5 multiple currencies. If I'm exporting to Kenya, it's a shilling. If I'm going to Ghana, I have to deal with a cedi. If I'm going to Nigeria, naira, multiple currencies. Is the financial system across Africa talking to each other so that I can exchange and trade within the African continent? That's the first question I'd like you to answer. Related to that is the issue of currency convertibility. I think one of the issues that came up when we did the guided tour was that issue of converting currencies across different markets, and how sometimes they can be volatile if the dollar has been used as a reference currency. Can you unpack that for us, the challenges, but also what you think is being done to address that particular problem? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, as you said, it's true. The part of the challenges faced by African business people or trade across African countries is the payment system. So today, if a trader is, let me use Rwanda and even Kenya, leave alone Ghana, in most cases, the Rwandan trader will have to deal with the Rwandan bank, your bank. Then your bank deals with a correspondent bank in the Western world, either in New York, London, or Frankfurt. Then that Western bank deals with the Western bank of the receiving trader in another African country. So the network is long and gets even more difficult. Recently, after the financial crisis in 2008, and after that there were challenges in the regulatory regimes in the West, and they started taking heavy penalties for any slight lapses, say in ML, CFT, anti-money laundering or financing terrorism and all that. So most of the big Western banks started pulling out of our continent and the other low-income countries, what they called de-risking. And so, one, they're pulling out their establishments here, their presence here as banks, as branches, or I mean as subsidiaries. But also they started putting a lot of restrictions dealing with our banks. That in itself makes it difficult for banks to get correspondent banks in the Western world, because that perceived risk factor attached to our financial institutions. And to get a bank we're working with becomes even very expensive. So there's that issue of the cost, the issue of dealing with a chain of banks from here to Europe, America, back to Kenya. So that makes it difficult. Then the other point is dealing with the currencies. You talked of currencies. So the trader here is dealing with Rwandan francs, but if you are going to sell goods to a trader in Kenya or in Ghana, of course you won't receive CDs because it's not a global accepted currency. So the global accepted currency today is mainly euro and the US. The US is the leading, but also the euro. So you have to change to Rwandan francs to, for example, the importing trader in Ghana will have to change the CDs to dollars, then they send it to the Rwandan francs and change the dollars to Rwandan francs. In fact, even worse still, the western part of Africa, mainly the French-speaking, Mene trade in euros. So the Mene deal with euros, and the other bigger part deal in dollars. So there's also that difference between the African countries themselves. So what do we do to resolve such a problem? It's not easy. So one, we need to establish African financial institutions that are trusted and acceptable globally, that could act as correspondent financial institutions. So instead of going to Citi, Deutsche Bank, or whatever, at least you need to have a trusted financial institution in Africa that could act as the interlink between a bank in one country and a bank in another country. So that is one. That requires a lot of things, governance and all these. Unfortunately, the financial institutions in our countries carry the burden of the risk of our sovereigns. So when these rating agencies come to rate any financial institution in a country, they start with a sovereign rating of the country you're based in. So they attach a risk to that, and that, unfortunately, we again linked to what we were saying, what was being said in the morning. This risk factor that I would say is attributed to us by the West, we end up being part of it. A financial institution here will not work with a financial institution in another African country because that financial institution has been classified as risky, and then we have these ratings, A+, there's AA, like that. So we need to do more beyond just linking trade, but also to really emphasize our governance structures across the continent within our countries to de-risk our financial institutions. The financial institutions themselves have to do a lot. They have to play their part. But also as sovereigns, we need to work to de-risk our financial institutions so that they can be considered as globally viable financial institutions that can act in the global trade network. So what we've been trying to do, as we have an association of African central banks. Originally, payment system wasn't a big topic on our agenda. We're mainly focusing on the key agenda we are given by the heads of state was to see how we, at the end of the day, we create a one monetary union across the continent and one central bank, which is sort of still far-fetched. But with this CFTA, we've now focused on how we can create and ease the movement of money across between our countries. So we had set up a working group to focus on that. Then, good enough, one financial institution, African financial institution, the African Export-Import Bank, started investing in a payment system, what we call the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Now we engaged with them to see how can this be a solution to this problem. It has its own challenges. As when it was started. They didn't really take time to engage with the regulators and see what is required here and there. But we are on the table now. We've had several meetings with them. In fact, we have that working group of the AACB, of the African Central Banks, will be meeting here in Kigali end of this month to discuss with the PAPS team. So we are looking at challenges, mainly of this currency convertibility that you said. The founding principle of this trade across African continents was, African countries, was also try and remove that need of using a hard foreign currency. So we're trying to see what can we do if I'm sending good, like what the example you're giving, when one of our traders sent goods to Ghana, they expected to be paid in CDs, and so it's trying to really link Rwandan franc and CDs. So how do we do that? How do we trade between ourselves using our currencies? And then the question of that currency convertibility comes in. Unfortunately, we are now talking at continental level, been grappling with that problem at the East African level. So at the AAC level, I think the question you put to the SG earlier, that whether these regs are a challenge, if anything, I hope the regs we are playing their part, they would have been a catalyst to the CFTA. So if our East African payment system was working well already, there would be a lot of lessons to learn from that for the benefit of the entire continent. I think SACU, the South African region, is more integrated, and more integrated because they have South Africa as the leading, and they have been all really driving on the rand. Almost all of them, their currencies are almost pegged to the rand. They've had some challenges of recent because the rand also had challenges here and there, but at least for it's working because they have a dominant currency. So today, for example, the example you gave of the trader that went to Ghana, they negotiated the sale price in Ghana cedis, and by the time the payment was to happen, Ghana cedi was depreciating faster during that period, and it became a problem now. So I think at the beginning, before we really do full convertibility between our currencies, we still have to use the dominant global currency. We can't do otherwise. It's accepted means of exchange globally, and it's been a stable currency, that's mainly the dollar. So I think even if we wanted to quote in our currencies, but we have to, pegging it is like we are negotiating today, but even if we are negotiating at this exchange rate today, if payment happens after a month or so, the actual payment will be the value of that currency vis-a-vis the stable international currency at that date of payment, not at the date of negotiating the deal. Otherwise, it will be a challenge in terms of really managing the currency convertibility. So, but if going back to the PAPs, if it works well, we log in we expect to really sort of agree on how we can convert our currencies, and at least if we were to work with the Afreximbank, one, we want to see it positioning itself as a correspondent bank, as a clearing house. Then the other challenge was, okay, if today, which is one of the challenges we're having in EAC, if today I'm exporting a lot of goods to Uganda, say Rwanda is exporting a lot of goods to Uganda, and that means there'll be a lot of Ugandans will be coming to Rwanda to buy Rwandan goods using Ugandan shillings. And in our agreement, our traders here are supposed to accept Ugandan shillings, and they deposit to the banks here, immediately they get the Rwandan currency. And the bank working with us, the central banks, are expected to net off at the end of the day with traders taking, now that is, yes, now Ugandans exporting goods to Rwanda, accepting Rwandan francs. At the end of the day, we have a pool of Rwandan francs in Uganda and a pool of Ugandan shillings here. we net off the payment using these two currencies. Now the challenge becomes where there's too much trade on one side and therefore big amount of one currency vis-a-vis the other. Automatically we have to refer to the dollar in this case to set off the difference. But at least we need to start at that level. If instead of requiring $100 million for the trade between our two countries, maybe when we net off the balance will be maybe $50 million. At least let's start with that instead of requiring the entire thing. So it's a process we are in. It's not that easy because of the challenges we are having with our currencies. So it could only really work perfectly well if we had stable currencies. Then the other is, of course, on the regulatory regimes. How do we manage anti-money laundering practices between our borders? So I need to trust that any movement of money from my counterpart on the other side, there's really linked to genuine trade between the two countries. There aren't any money laundering that is taking money from here, washing it to the other side, and then it's brought back through the system. So we need to be sure that the anti-money laundering or financing terrorism regimes are working well across the different borders. So that's what we are trying to do. As I say, it's not easy, but we understand the challenges, and we are engaged now today as central banks is on top of our agenda. I know we've been discussing this with Echi himself. He had this mandate or directive from the heads of state that we need to have these PAPs working and working soon. But the technicalities here and there that we're trying to sort out, and we hope. I think this is one solution that we think can work. So what we're engaged in is to see how we can make it work and work properly.
Thank you, Governor John. Can we dream of a common currency in Africa, just like we have the euro in Europe? Some people have called it the Afro.
You have a name for it.
Yeah. Dreaming is good. You can dream, so maybe the challenge is, will the dream become a reality? It takes time, but it can happen. I think earlier the SG talked of the European Union that took more than 70 years to achieve the euro. It can happen, but it requires commitment, it requires discipline, it requires a lot. A currency is not just the paper and the money. A currency is linked to an economy. A currency is linked to the governance of an economy. So, as you saw in Europe, some time back, they had issues with some of their members that had fiscal indiscipline, let me put it like that, and it created a lot of problems in their financial system. It created a lot of problems in their financing. So there was two things. The euro, the bigger economies in euro had to come in to save these economies because it was affecting the entire euro area. But on the other side, they are saying if these economies were not tied to the euro, then the fiscal discipline and all that that goes with being part of the euro, they could have had their own way of mobilizing resources to finance their needs. So it requires to, first have economic union before you think of having a currency. And economic union means fiscal discipline, same fiscal discipline across the borders, requires full integration of our economies in terms of trade, movement of capital, movement of labor, movement of goods and services. So it requires a lot. I think before thinking of, okay, now we've moved to CFTA, maybe we could say we've been thinking of the East African currency. As you know, I think it was said earlier here, we had expected it to be enforced by 2024, that is next year. When we agreed on this roadmap 10 years ago, we thought it was achievable. Unfortunately, 10 years down the road, we haven't even established the East African Monetary Institute. That was supposed to be established in 2015. And the Monetary Institute was the one supposed to lead the process of establishing an East African Monetary Union, East African Central Bank, and East African currency. So I'm using that simple example of 6 countries by then that we haven't managed to achieve. Now, when you take it to the continental level, it requires a lot of political commitment, a lot really, really serious political commitment across the countries. At least might not be the 55 countries, but maybe get 2/3 of the countries committed to this. The rest will follow. But we need that serious political commitment to economic integration, to fiscal discipline, to a customs union, as Arya said, before you dream of a currency.
Thank you, and I think that's the progressiveness that we understand integration to be. You know, start with a free trade area, build your customs union, then probably become a monetary union eventually. But I think the key message is let's start. We'll see progressiveness as we go. I'll soon come to the audience for Q&A, but before we do that, I want to bring in the private sector. We have Jack Kayonga here, Dr. Jack Kayonga from Crystal Ventures. A business that is not only trading within Rwanda, but also looking at opportunities across Africa. Jack, you've heard all the panelists talk about the opportunities that the African Continental Free Trade Area brings. Coming to you as a private sector, does it sound real?
There is strong political support, but when you move to some of these countries that we have been able to try and work with, it has not yet got to the lower cadres. You will not find it in customs, you will not find it in any of the government offices. So it is still a challenge, but the fact that you have the countries that have ratified, we're also seeing ourselves being able to import some of the goods from these countries and benefit from those privileges in customs, especially here in Rwanda.
Can you also share, Jack, some of the benefits that you think, if supported, you should be able to seize?
As a business in Rwanda, one of the things that would benefit is in terms of costs. Maybe let me give an example. In some of the construction projects that we are undertaking, we have been able to start considering importing from countries and Egypt, because once you get them here, you'll be able to benefit. But the biggest challenge still remains around getting the rules of origin documentation in most of these countries, because even when you talk to some of the manufacturers in these countries, they even don't know what AfCFTA stands for. The other benefit from this is also around movement of people, but most importantly is also the market, because when you invest in some of these countries, especially around agriculture, like the Honorable Minister mentioned, it will be a wider market, and we are already seeing benefits of that, and even being able to reduce on the food security in some of these countries.
Thank you. Now, if you have this one wish list, you talk about some of the challenges that you've had. You've talked about some of the challenges. If you had Hello? Okay, this is working. If you had just one wish list that you wanted all the panelists together to focus on, what would that one thing be to make it easy for you to go across the African continent and do business?
It's a long list.
If you picked one, what would that be?
basing on the experience of Rwanda, I think the one thing that could help address the challenges is to have a one-stop center that investors can go to and be able to get the facilitation that we deserve as investors in these countries. I'm not picking on you, Claire. It's just that that's the truth.
I think you want to trade one-stop center services. Okay, so thank you very much to the panelists. I think we'll be coming back at the end, but I wanted to open up for the audience to ask questions about the African Continental Free Trade Area. Please raise your hand if you have questions. Have you, understood what the ACFTA is? I think Jack said some people think it's just an abbreviation. I hope you don't think it's an army force. Thank you. Yes, I see the gentleman over here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. For the benefit of the moderator and indeed our distinguished panels, first and foremost, I'm Major General George Gumba, the Commandant of the Senior Command and Staff College, Shimaka, Uganda, the sister college to Rwanda Defense Force Command and Staff College, the organizers of this gigantic congregation. My confession is that I've always found difficulty with pronouncing the acronym AFSFTA. And for that reason, I will deliberately avoid to make reference to it in my humble submission. To Honorable Minister and distinguished panels, the concept of establishing the structure makes a lot of sense, in that its existence aims at facilitating and enhancing not only interstate, interregional, and continental trade, but also intrastate movement of both goods and services at respective local levels. What would be the challenge? Dr. I beg your pardon. This must have been Mr. Gini Guy Africa. You labored to deal with this matter of challenge of infrastructure, and painfully so. I'm not neither a prophet of doom nor a pessimist, but on top of the mechanisms already in place so far, I would want to know how robust rather are the physical and tangible ones to facilitate the easy movement or transfer of such goods and services from point A, B, F, all the way to Z, especially with the impediments imposed on us by the advent of the notorious COVID-19 pandemic with its attendant restrictions. We are all aware that movement can either be by road or sea and air. And of those, it's the sea and indeed the road which are relatively cheaper. The air one, in as much as it may be fastest, but its costs is prohibitive. in circumstances, my take would be that let member nation states get firm hold of their militaries and use the services of their Air Force transport platforms, whose acquisition may not be so bureaucratic as compared to the public or private ones, which, if we take that way, may take us as much longer as one may think of. I happened to visit the headquarters of the cumbersome acronym I started with in Accra, Ghana, some 6 or so weeks ago. A magnificent facility, very attractive, very impressive. And in my humble opinion, I thought maybe as that infrastructure was being put up, maybe some roads also concurrently would be being constructed between states, especially those who are shorter, not as long as one would want to move from Western Uganda to Eastern DRC, or from Uganda to Cairo, for that matter. Now, the infrastructure is in place, the building is in place, the human resource is in place, but for the next so many years, there will be no facility to allow the easy movement of first state, this is a trade between states. That's my humble submission. I hope I'll be taken in good faith. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General George. Does anybody want to react to the comments and questions from the Major General? Maybe FDB on what you're doing to actually build infrastructure so that countries can be connected. I also probably want SG Wamkele to comment on when we talk about the work plan for the AFCFTA. You're not the only one who can pronounce that acronym. I think it's a common problem. But do you also work on working with institutions like FDB, Afreximbank, to also prioritize infrastructure that can support the trade between countries? Thank you.
Thank you, General, for the question. You know, you asked a very delicate question. How sustainable is the infrastructure we're building? You know, in Africa, the bank, the member countries, and these ports, railways in some instances, waterways, roads, airports. And the answer is, it depends. And it kind of touches on the topic that we addressed yesterday on governance. I think you'll find that where you go to countries where governance systems are strong, the infrastructure lasts, you know, because there is accountability, there is efficient use of resources, so all the services that must accompany an investment in infrastructure are there. Very little wastage. If you go to those countries where there are significant governance challenges, you'll see a road and a few rains and the road has disappeared. So it really has to do with the quality of the governance and administrative systems of the country. As far as the African Development Bank is concerned, we take very specific measures to make sure that our infrastructure lasts. So this almost never happens on our infrastructure, but I'm speaking here of infrastructure investment in general. I think it's very closely tied to governance, to the efficient use of resources, financial, human, and just the overall quality of our investments. You also touched, I'd like to single out one issue because you spoke about air. And I think it's an important issue that we must unpack. And I'd like to highlight some of the latest initiatives that are happening on the continent in which the African Development Bank Group is supporting. And it's called the Single African Air Transport Market. We call it SATAM. You might have heard about it. So when you look at the airline industry, 20 to 40% of costs, operating costs, are attributable to fuel. But then when you compare it to Europe, for example, regulatory bottlenecks cause us to increase the cost of travel by 20%, the operating costs. So that's what SATAM is trying to do. And I'll give you some example. We are trying to address issues of access. A lot of countries, because of protectionist tendencies, a desire to develop an airline in the foreseeable future, charge exorbitant fees to fly through the countries, to the country or to land. So access is one issue that we're trying to solve with SATAM. A second one is frequency. They also limit the number of times that your plane can land in the country, which also makes it more costly to travel because you can't fly as much as you wanted to. The last one is capacity. There are a lot of regulatory restrictions that limit the types of planes that you can operate. So all these together is what we're working on at the African Development Bank with the support of the AU, the AFCFTA, to try to address, to make it easier to travel. The last thought on air travel is I think the trend is towards consolidation, and we need to move away from this thinking that every country must have an airline and that these regulatory fees are important because they generate customs revenue.
SG?
Thank you very much. We have a very limited mandate. We are a trade secretariat. We do not have a mandate to address infrastructure in the way that Jean-Guy described. But the underlying point Major General makes is absolutely correct, that you are not going to be able to boost intra-Africa trade if you don't have trade supporting infrastructure. So we are actually in very, very close collaboration with African Development Bank, African Export-Import Bank, Afrexim Bank, as well as Africa Finance Corporation, so that based on their balance sheets and their mandates, we can have a complementary approach to boosting intra-Africa trade from their perspective, investing in infrastructure. If you take, for example, a country next door to where I live, Togo. Togo has a world-class port. That port services, the Port of Lome services Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and is connecting those countries to the sea through a road transport corridor. Similarly, if you go to Walvis Bay in Namibia, in Eastern Africa, Port of Mombasa. So infrastructure development is critical to boosting intra-Africa trade. The investment close to or over $50 billion that we heard over the last 5-6 years is remarkable. But of course we need more to invest in infrastructure. Second, connectivity, air transport connectivity, cargo connectivity. A point that Major General made about bringing in national air forces is again correct. I was in Uganda yesterday, and I was very happy to hear that Uganda has 200 billion liters of milk, excess milk, a year. Now, how do you get the milk to West Africa? You can't take it by road. So you need to have good air connectivity so that the goods can move across the regions of the continent. When I went to the AU summit last year in Malabo, I went from Accra to Lome, from Lome to Cotonou, from Cotonou to Lagos, from Lagos finally to Malabo. It took me the entire day. And the cost, of course, is exorbitant. On the return, a friend who happens to have a private jet gave me a lift. It took 1 hour, 15 minutes. A journey that 2 days earlier took me the entire day. So the cost of air transport, the cost of cargo transport is very, very high. And that is why our development finance institutions have to do more to provide support to the airline industry, because we have to create our own market. No one is going to create it for us. And that's why the investment that is being made by AFDB, Afrexim Bank, Africa Finance Corporation is critical. Also, another area of infrastructure that is important is maritime transport connectivity on both coastlines of the continent. I visited the port of Tangier in Morocco. They told me that if you want to export, if you want to send a container from Tangier to Abidjan, it will cost you $4,000 a container. If you want to send that same container from Tangier to Abidjan via China, it will cost you $900. Via China, it will cost you $900. So that means that we have to invest in creating that market for ourselves. The market is not going to create itself. It's not going to invest in itself. We have to do it. And that's where the role of the development finance institutions becomes so important, because somebody has to invest in establishing a new market. And somebody has to be willing not to see returns on their investments in the immediate, but we are looking in the long term, where we are creating this air traffic connectivity, rail connectivity, maritime connectivity. We are creating a market for ourselves for boosting intra-Africa trade.
How often do you sit down with President Adesina and President Orama to talk about these things?
We sit down very, very frequently. And I congratulate President Adesina for just in the 5-6 years, for the amount of money that has been invested in infrastructure. I have visited many ports around the continent that have been financed by Afrexim Bank and AFDB. And now recently we see Africa Finance Corporation also coming on board. I don't know the totality of the balance sheet between the three, but certainly between the three, and if we bring in our regional development finance institutions, we should be in a position to begin to address some of these challenges, crowding in private sector investment, private equities, sovereign wealth funds. Again, referring to African Development Bank, they mobilized close to $16 billion for the Abidjan-Lagos trade corridor. We are going to look at other corridors for them to do a similar mobilization of private sector investment. So we do have frequent discussions about what needs to be done. And obviously there is limited resources, but within the limited resources, we have to do all that we can to address the infrastructure bottleneck.
Thank you, SG. Back to the audience. I would like to take some more questions. I see a hand at the very back. Maybe we shall take 3 at a time. And then if you have a specific person you want to answer the question, please identify them. Somebody help with the microphone, please.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to ask my question. I'm Major John Kawandana from Rwanda Defense Force. I'm a student. My question will be addressed to Honorable Minister of Trade, Dr. Jean-Chrysostome Ngabitsinze. So this morning, we've been discussing about foreign interference and the lack of political commitment to fill the gaps existing in our political structures to address this issue. This afternoon, we have also been discussing about political fragmentation and lack of commitment to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, my concern is, do we also have foreign interference that prevents some African heads of state to implement this agreement? Thank you.
You'll have to hold on. The minister requests to answer that question first.
Yeah, thank you, CEO. I want to respond it immediately before to forget, because it's very important and it's a tough question from a student. I think I was in the classroom in Nyakinama. You was one of the students for sure. It's months ago, and you were discussing.
Did he ask you a difficult question again?
I think I remember him. But it's very important to say students to ask tough questions. Of course, political interference, political fragmentation can't miss where there is a will of independence. So when people become independent, political, economical, you will always have external factors who doesn't want that you achieve it. So the answer is yes. But which impact you give to them is where the problem can come in. When you talk about continental free trade, and is Africa talking, you can understand. Because Africa, we have 2 types of numbers, the negatives one and the positives one. The positives one is our forces, from the population they talked about, the inputs we have, and so and so and so. The negatives ones is we are not able to exploit the positive ones. And those negative ones are in the hands of some external powers. So if you want really to achieve, we have to focus on the positive ones, but work hands in hands of the negative ones. Infrastructures, processing capacity, political will is a thought, is not tangible. We have not a parameter to calculate it and have it as a tangible number, but it's there. So what we see is there is a political will today to make sure that Africa can be independent. So the solutions is coming from here. If you can sit here and discuss on them, meaning that is one of the solutions we can have to make sure that we model what is positive, then we put a control way to control the negative one. So this will always be. Any step we will do, we will have challenges, we will maximize under constraint, and those constraints will give us the force to have the second step. I'm sure as a military you understand what we call resilience. You have to be resilient and continue the journey, even if you have those external factors wanted to impact us negatively. Thank you, Clare.
Thank you. Next question, somebody in the middle. Who had your hand up? Yes, you.
My name is Major Badaranja. I'm from Senegal, and I am a student. I want to direct my question to the governor of the National Bank of Rwanda. We can see that the success of this trade area is linked to the economic integrations. And earlier you give a perfect example between the how challenging it is to change fund between two countries. And now I imagine at continental level with 42 different currencies. And I want to know if it is not too fast, and is it sustainable for the African free trade continent area to do without economic integration?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Claire, and thanks to the question from the student. Free trade area is part of the economic integration, and I think it's one of the key drivers of economic integration. And when we talk of free trade area, it means opening up the borders for our countries. So there should be easy movement of goods. I think at the beginning you're starting with goods, but then also services. Services includes human capital moving across borders. So it's not too soon. I think it's good that we started that. There are other enabling factors like what my colleague said earlier. But otherwise, yes, it's possible. We just need to be committed politically. And when we say politically, it's not like what Jack said earlier. You might have the leaders committed to this integration. If the lower cadres are not integrated into this and directed or followed up, they become stumbling block. That's the problem. So when we talk of political will and the commitment, it means across the system. Everybody has to be ready to facilitate this free trade moving across borders. And when I say ready to facilitate, it's not just opening up the borders. There are rules of the game that we need to follow. And when we say the rules of origin for goods from Rwanda to other countries, I have a responsibility as Rwanda to make sure that the goods that I send across the borders really meets the rules of origin in a genuine way. There's no faking things, because that will create issues of mistrust. And so we're all supposed to be responsible players in this game. That's when we can build that trust across borders. I think the question of mistrust had said earlier. And yes, so then removing the fear. Today, there's talk of, I think SG has just talked about the issues of air transport. It's damn expensive across African countries because we've really closed our airspace. Today it's cheaper to fly from here to Europe than flying from here to, say, even to Congo, to Cameroon. So we need to open up our borders. We need to remove all these non-tariff barriers. So maybe the other question which I thought to ask was talking of a single currency, or at least the convertibility of our currencies. That might take time, but it doesn't have to be a stumbling block. Today, the little trade we have is done through the long process that I said earlier. If we had to open up the borders, it's easy to use African financial institutions. I talked of the Afrexim Bank, and we hope they are committed to really play this role, and we are working with them as central banks to support this process. So all that makes it easier for trade across our borders. So it's not far-fetched. It's possible, and it has to start now. Otherwise, we'll never achieve any of the ambitions of African unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Maybe to the front here. Second row, first row. You can go ahead.
Thank you. I'm KK, I'm a retired military officer. I'd like to pick to ask the governor of the central bank to respond to this question. There is a lot of talk about BRICS, many countries wanting to join the BRICS, about a BRICS currency, and all that. Some have argued that should the currency come, then the dollar will get weaker. But he also explained that for a long time we will need to rely on some currency to which we can peg our own currencies for us to be able to trade. What would be the implication of that BRICS currency in the process of us trading as Africans? And how would that affect what you said is a long way away anyway, the process of us getting our own currency? Thank you.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, there has been a lot of talk around the BRICS currency. And maybe going back to what I had said earlier, currency is not just a means of exchange. It has a lot behind it. It has monetary policy behind it. It has economic stability. When we talk of monetary policies around economic stability to support the currency. So it's good intentions by the BRICS countries to set up an alternative currency to ease the dominance of the dollar across the world trade. And it's a good intention, but it's not an easy thing that will be realized tomorrow. It will take time. It will take time because it requires a lot of factors for a currency to be stable and trusted globally. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the US, they took advantage of the dominance, the economic dominance they have had for centuries, and their currency has been really accepted, and they've built that foundation. And it's also built to an economy that is strong, the first economy in the world. I think it will take the US to mess up themselves to weaken their currency than other currencies coming up to weaken it. So it's if they remain solid economic managers, it takes time. And so when the euro came into play, everybody expected that the US was going to be weakened by the euro because it was linked to strong economies. It has eaten up into some shares of the US dollar in terms of the global trade, but still far from really recognized as the US dollar globally. So I wouldn't say that the BRICS currency would create any challenge to the intention of the African countries to set up their own payment mechanism between ourselves. That shouldn't be a problem, really. I think if we were able to do it ourselves, this is not a big problem. But what I just want to say, I've seen in the papers of recent, we asked this question in our press conference after our Monetary Policy Committee 2 weeks ago, and our response was like, we don't expect to see the BRICS really coming in tomorrow and taking over the dollar. So it's like, we still see the dollar being dominant for quite some time. And I've had a lot of talk here and there that it's like we don't want to take up this opportunity that has come up. I wish we had it. Unfortunately, it's not yet there. It will take time. When it is there, it's an alternative that we can use. We've tried to diversify our reserves, but at the end of the day, even the trading part, take an example. I'm sorry, I have to mention China here because it's a big trading partner across the world. But most of their traders want to trade in dollars. So at least we expected even the Chinese as a strong economy that is building its muscle globally, and they had in fact even created a special currency for global trading. They have the Chinese yuan and the RMB that is supposed to be used as a global currency. Even admitted into the IMF SDRs, but we haven't seen it building on the muscle of the Chinese economy to become an alternative currency globally. Leave alone using it for trading in other countries. Even trading between other countries and China is still dominated by dollars. So there's still a lot of work to be done for these alternative currencies to really provide that comfort, and so it would be good if it was to be done. To be sincere, I'm not afraid of saying that. It's not good that the global trade would be dominated by one currency that could be used for other purposes, but takes time. It takes time, and it's not just switching like this, that the intention is there and the thing will, I haven't seen the architecture of the supporting economic management behind the BRICS currency. That has to be done properly for it to even take shape and start operating. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to come to this side, at the back especially. Please prepare any question if you have, but as we do that, General Gatete, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Moderator, Honorable Minister, High Table, all protocol observed. Well, it's good to have created this free trade area, but in Kinyarwanda we say, ija kurisha ihera kurugo, or charity begins at home. If we talk our regional bloc, East Africa, when we talk of goods and services, it is said like easily but not implemented. I'm an advocate with Rwanda Bar Association and the East African Law Society, but if I want to go and represent a client in Kenya, they put a roadblock. It's like a cake. No, don't come. Don't come to my area. Don't. Mm-hmm. So who is responsible for removing these bottlenecks, these barriers? Who is responsible to dismantle protectionism? Who is responsible to draw a roadmap? Thank you. Another thing is that about mindset of Africa, when we cry of wheat and petrol from Ukraine and Russia, I was looking at the population size of Tanzania versus Ukraine, Ethiopia versus Ukraine, Nigeria versus Ukraine. You find that we are about 5 times bigger, even the population big. But the mindset that we must import these things from there should be changed. So, sir, the SG, the question of mindset to enable us to think big should be inculcated in our minds. Thank you.
Who wants to answer that question? Who is responsible for ensuring there's mutual recognition of professional services like lawyers, especially in the EAC? I know that has been a discussion as part of our common market. Maybe Minister Ngabitsinze wants to talk about what's happening there. And I don't know, SG, if you want to also touch on that, on how we are approaching, integration of services. And the last question, who wants to take the last question? Ethiopia, Ukraine, mindset, how are we going to, maybe Mama Keita, you want to touch on mindset? I'll give that to you. Thanks.
Okay, the General asked who is responsible. I am not responsible. I find the General, I'm not responsible, but let's see. I have some responsibilities in ESC because I'm a member of the Ministerial Council on Trade, so we are responsible as ministers because I've been appointed to deal with those protectionism.
So you're responsible?
No, we are responsible, not myself. We are responsible, so it's a responsibility we share across all countries in East Africa. So what he's saying is what I said before, protectionism is negative. But unfortunately, we still have it in our hearts. The cake is talking about is protected not only with civilians, even with officers, generals. So meaning that people don't want to share. And unfortunately, this is bringing us back because this increases the cost of transactions. We delay on implementation because people are busy on protecting what must be shared and multiplied. So it's negative and is there, but the one way to deal with is revising our rules, regulations, and laws. Because mainly we see that people have policies who are protecting. They not have policies who are opening, but through then the SG will talk about it, because now the AFCFTA is in charge of those blocks to make sure that our policies, our laws, our regulations are aligned with the mentality we must have to open Africa to trade each other. So for that reason, SG perhaps is responsible. Thank you.
SG, the ball has come to you.
Well, I will shift the blame to somebody else, to the professional associations. My experience is that the professional associations, either in a region or a country, that's where the protectionism starts. These countries, law society, will say, no, 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 they are not as well qualified as we are here. If they want to come, they must do a conversion course and spend 3-4 years behind a desk. Similarly with the medical professions. In the AFCFTA, there's provision for mutual recognition agreements, and those are driven by the professional associations, not by us trade people. So the professional associations have to come to an agreement about a minimum standard of qualification that is required in a region or continent for the professionals to move seamlessly across the borders. So that is something that, of course, we have to facilitate, but we have to allow the professional associations to negotiate the minimum standards that are required for the trade in the service to take place. The point on, if I may also just touch while I have the floor, the point on protectionism and the mind shift. If you take, for example, let's take copper. You have copper in Zambia. The copper is exported from Zambia to another part of the world. It's processed in another part of the world and is sent back to a factory in Lesotho. That factory in Lesotho manufactures car seats. The cost to Africa's industrialization, I know that thankfully the government of Zambia now is very, very determined, and most governments on the continent are very determined to make sure that there's value addition that takes place in Africa. Similarly, between Nigeria and Ghana, close to 70% of the world's cocoa production. So the two governments have come together and the two heads of states have said, no more export of unprocessed cocoa to another part of the world, to export the cocoa to us as a finished product. So what we would like to see in terms of a mind shift is in Southern Africa, consumption of chocolate produced in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. In West Africa, consumption of beef from Botswana, and vice versa, so that we produce and consume on our own continent. It is really unfortunate that you will have countries that are continuing to import agricultural products when we have them here in Africa. And so we have to accelerate the reduction of these barriers so that we enable consumption of what we have, value-added production of what we have here on the African continent.
Thank you. Mama Keita,
maybe if I could comment on the question of who is responsible to remove the barriers. So my colleagues have said the bar association will be responsible, but I doubt they will ever remove the barriers. So I think...
Because they have conflict of interest.
Yes, so I think the policymakers will have to come in by all means. If you remember some time back, I think 2015, it took our presence in East Africa, let me say to direct, though you would say it's against free business practices, to direct the telecom companies to connect with each other, to create East Africa as one area, they call it one area network, and remove the roaming charges. There was some resistance then, but it had to be done. And when it was done, the telecommunication companies benefited from this opening up. So I think with these other disciplines, we may need the power, the policymakers, to put up guidelines and enforce that opening up. If we leave it to, I'm sorry, to the business people, I don't think we achieve anything.
Okay, thank you. Mama Keita?
Thank you very much. So you asked me to say something about the change in mindset, right? Based on his question on why Africa is importing from abroad while we have big economy here that can supply some of these things. I'm very optimistic that this is going to change, and this optimism is coming from lesson from COVID, actually. With COVID, we've learned a lot. We've seen what was called vaccine appetite, whereby some trade policies were set up preventing countries who had the vaccine or input for vaccine that were needed to make forbidden the export of those products. You see, restrictions. Thank you. So the export, yes, they put some export restriction on their products, and yet Africa needed those products actually. So this has brought African countries to think that now they need to start supplying some of the essential things that they need for survival, actually. And this has, I mean, here in Rwanda now, Rwanda is embarking in manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, of vaccine, which is good, not only Rwanda, but other countries in the continent. And this is a good start, and I'm sure that this is going to continue and to be extended to some of the other products that you mentioned, the grains that are coming from Ukraine and from Russia. It's a strategic issue that African countries need to think about. Can they afford this dependency? I am sure that the answer is no, because, I mean, as you said, moderator, we have the continent with the largest population growing, and in 2050 is going to be even bigger. So leaving food security in the hand of external players is not a smart thing, I think. So Africa will start producing what the continent really really needs. And we've seen also some action towards that. Even before we embark into the production of vaccines, when the COVID started, the first reaction was to protection of people and then to access some of those protective goods, actually. The gloves, the hydrohygienic things, the mask, and all the stuff. And when, let's say, small-size African countries start to put their demand in the global market, they were not served just because of the demand was too small. Then African Union came with the idea of aggregating the demand, pooling the demand, and coming up with an African demand. From that, the supplier accepted to supply African markets, and it came, and with the help of Ethiopian Airlines, it was distributed from one African country to another. So again, this means that Africa, just what the case I wanted to make here is the importance of integration, actually. Integrate the demand and also organize to supply for that demand. When Africa also pulled that demand together, when manufacturers saw the extent of the demand in the continent, they started producing in the continent to serve that demand. So really, again, to emphasize on the importance of the integration, and I have no doubt that African countries will now start producing what is needed for the continent and come up with some substitution in terms of source of supply.
Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time, but I promised this side at least one question. Maybe I'll There's someone there, and then maybe I'll give this side for purposes of democracy. One side as well, you, and then maybe we'll stop there for now. So one here, one there, and you will answer the questions after the two. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, moderator and the panelists. I am Lieutenant Colonel, a Gorbol from South Sudan, People Defense Force. I am a student of Rwandan Defense Force Command and Staff College. My question goes to Your Excellency Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of African Free Trade Area. My question is that after you did the presentation, I am well informed, and I have seen that it is very important for our continent. Now, how do you make sure that the African youth are unified? They understand what we are doing here. Do you have marketing strategic tools to communicate what you have been communicating to us here? That's one thing. Secondly, the starting of the trade entity like this did not start with ours. You have seen some in the Europe free trade areas. I am seeing that for those who have not signed, it's not a setback. Because those who are there already, why not start doing something to attract the other people? Why am I seeing this one like upper layer of African Union? And this is the business, and the business you need to do something so that people can see what you are doing is beneficial to them. It is involved money. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you answered that question. Then the last question here. Yes, please.
Merci, madame, de m'avoir donné la parole. Je suis le colonel Maurice Ndion, attaché militaire du Sénégal en Éthiopie. Donc nous savons tous que les défis socio-économiques, la marginalisation... excusez-moi, ma question s'adresse à M. Wamkele, secrétaire général de la ZLECAf, et à Mme Keita. Voilà. Donc nous savons que les défis socio-économiques, la marginalisation et les déficits de gouvernance sont des moteurs évidents de conflits en Afrique. Pensez-vous que les grandes opportunités économiques promises par la ZLECAf peuvent contribuer à la paix? Si oui, comment? Ou au contraire, pensez-vous comme certains que parler de ZLECAf, c'est mettre la charrue avant les bœufs et qu'il faut d'abord venir à bout de l'insécurité qui règne sur le continent et qui entravera forcément sa mise en œuvre? Ne serait-il pas utopique aujourd'hui de parler aux Soudanais de ZLECAf? Merci.
C'est une autre question compliquée, ça.
Thank you. Makete, I hope you understood the questions. Mr. Wamkele, do you want to go first?
Non, j'ai compris.
Il a compris.
Okay, the question is AFCFTA versus building or strengthening peace in Africa. What should come first? Yeah, is it an utopia to think that AFCFTA can be implemented while part of the continent is burning, actually? He mentioned the issue of Sudan. So I understood the question. I'm not sure I have the answer to the question. Ce que je peux vous dire, monsieur, c'est que je n'ai pas de doute sur les bienfaits de la ZLECAf. Je pense que c'est un impératif de mettre cet agenda en œuvre. Je pense que la population africaine est extrêmement jeune. Si on ne prend pas les dispositions pour créer de l'emploi, des conditions d'emploi pour cette population-là, le continent en entier risque d'être dans un chaos dans le futur. C'est extrêmement important. La jeunesse est de plus en plus consciente. Elle veut une justice sociale. Il est donc de notre devoir à tous de mettre en place des conditions pour la création d'emplois. Maintenant, c'est clair que la question de paix et sécurité est aussi extrêmement importante. Le commerce, c'est une affaire de déplacer des biens d'un point A à un point B. Et s'il y a un obstacle sur la route, cela devient extrêmement difficile. Et donc, oui, il faut s'attaquer impérativement à cette question de paix et de sécurité dans le continent. Et je pense que tous les États doivent venir ensemble et s'attaquer à cela. Moi, j'ai toujours pensé que la question de paix et sécurité en Afrique ne peut pas être laissée aux États individuels. D'abord, la perception sur l'Afrique est telle que beaucoup de gens, en tout cas ceux qui ont l'argent à l'extérieur du continent, ils voient l'Afrique comme un tout. Africa is unsecure. Ils disent l'Afrique n'est pas sécure. Donc, essayez les efforts des États individuels de se développer sans regarder le continent en un tout. Pour moi, je pense que c'est quelque chose qu'il faut revoir. Je pense que, et là on est en train de s'adresser aux forces de défense rwandaises et d'autres pays, je pense vraiment que cela doit être organisé de manière conjointe. Un seul État ne peut jamais être à l'abri, en toute sécurité, si la protection n'est pas organisée de manière générale. De la même façon qu'on parle d'intégration régionale, moi je suis convaincue qu'il faut qu'on organise aussi la défense du continent. Le continent a énormément de ressources. Il y a une question qui était posée au ministre tout à l'heure, selon laquelle est-ce qu'il y a des forces extérieures qui peuvent jouer sur la mise en œuvre de la ZLECAf ou non? Ma réponse aussi serait oui. Et je pense que la défense du continent, la paix et la sécurité doivent être organisées de manière collective. Et pour pouvoir présenter le continent en un tout comme une place sécure, une place où les investissements peuvent venir, une place où le risque, la perception de risque va être réduite et finalement où la ZLECAf pourrait être implémentée de manière optimale. Mais cela dit, l'Afrique elle est vaste, donc le fait qu'il y ait des foyers de tension ne devrait pas non plus nous empêcher de commencer le commerce. Là où c'est safe, le commerce peut prendre place, déjà commencer, et certainement les autres, en voyant cela, vont voir que finalement les bénéfices de cet agenda-là, les bénéfices de la paix, sont plus importants que les bénéfices de la guerre. Et donc ça peut aussi générer un changement de mindset dont on parlait tantôt, et amener les gens à travailler plutôt à la paix, à la création d'emplois, à la création de bien-être, plutôt que de continuer dans cette économie de guerre-là. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Maybe building on that question, and since we're here with the Rwanda Defense Forces, does any of the panelists want to also maybe give a comment on what you think the role of security organs in driving AFCFTA is? If anybody wants to answer that question, I think it's relevant also for the security organs here. And then if you can do that, but also answer the questions that are pushed to you, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. I was saying at the beginning that I found it curious that the Defense Force invited me. But it is quite clear, the linkage between security, peace, stability, and trade. So I have to admit, one of the stakeholders that we have not adequately engaged across the continent as we were discussing and negotiating this agreement are our defense forces, Continental. And I think as an outcome of this discussion, we will have to change that. The question that was asked on peace and stability on the continent, you will remember that 1 or 2 years ago, our heads of states, the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, designated as a theme of that year, silencing the guns, so that we can see and be able to advance on Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want. Last year, when the heads of states met in the summit that I referred to in Malabo, they decided to extend that to say this is the decade of silencing the guns. Obviously, there are instability incidents that are taking place. They also expressed very strong condemnation of unconstitutional changes of governments across the continent. These are the twin challenges that cause instability. I believe from the mandate of our heads of states, we have to do both. We have to pursue both at the same time. Peace and stability, and also trade at the same time. If you go to border communities, where there's an unconstitutional change of government, in most circumstances, the sectors of communities that suffer the most are the informal traders, because the unconstitutional change of power will lead to the border being closed. And then the goods cannot move, they can't transit because of the instability on the other side. So these are things that our heads of states are fully seized with, and they recognize the challenges, but from them as our leaders, and in my view, it is clear that we have to pursue both. Where we are able to reach stability, we will create jobs, job opportunities, and people will stop fighting, whether it is in the Sahel or any other region of our continent. And so clearly there is a linkage between trade, peace, and security. We have seen this in other parts of the world, but at the same time, I do not believe that as a continent, we are the capital of instability and wars, as we see what is happening in another part of the world. These conflict situations do happen, but they have to be managed and resolved politically. But my direct answer is that yes, we can do both. We can pursue peace and stability, and also trade opportunities.
Okay, thanks. I felt compelled to build on the example that the SG mentioned earlier, to just show how security considerations have actually driven the formation of the most successful integration project in the world, the European Union. He mentioned the European coal and steel community. And it brought me back to my regional integration courses. The actual reason for the creation of the European coal and steel community was security. Right after World War II, the Schuman Declaration, and the idea was that by pooling the production of coal and steel, they would make, France and Germany and the other countries that joined, Netherlands, Belgium, and I think another 2 or 3, they would make it unthinkable, and I'm using the words in the declaration, unthinkable and materially unfeasible to go to war. So you can see that the relationship between security and regional integration is bidirectional. Security helps in driving regional integration, but the more you integrate, particularly your production structures and important assets, imagine a railway, the more costly it becomes to go to war. So I just thought I would mention that. Thank you.
So we need trade, we need security for trade, but when we have trade, we have security. Great. So I think we've come to the end of this discussion, but I'm going to ask the panelists to give their final remark by answering the question that I asked Jack. And this question is, if you were invited to the African Union to address the 54 heads of state, and you had to mention one important factor that you think would help to make the AFCFTA a reality, what is that one important factor that you'd address the heads of state with? I'll start with you, Jean-Guy. I'll come down here and we'll close the panel. Jean-Guy, over to you.
If it was one thing, I would say just political will. The thing with regional integration is you very often face situations where you have technical bottlenecks, negotiations of rules of origin. A mention was made on mutual recognition. So the heads of states have to come at that time and make decisions for the greater good, not necessarily just the good of the country so that their interests are protected, but the greater good. So political will is the #1 key issue.
Thank you. Political will. Mama Keita, one factor that would make the FCFTA a reality, what is that in your view?
Only one?
Only one.
For me, I really think that we need to set the condition for the private sector to invest and to invest at scale. And something right now that is really important for me is to start creating some missing markets. When you speak with some of these, I mean, if they want to set up some factories, they don't get the input in quantity or in quality. And for that, I think that, some of those input market actually, while the natural resources is in Africa, the market take place abroad, and then the investment take place abroad. Some of those markets need to come in Africa through commodity market, commodity exchanges, markets such as the cocoa market, market on grains, market on minerals. I think that we need to start consolidating those markets and to see the entire, the quantity of the input and allow for big investors to come and tap into a big market and take the decision or make the decision to invest. So consolidating those input markets for
Private sector conditions. Thank you. John?
Yeah, thank you. I think the first speaker took my point, but and I kept on coming back to it during my earlier intervention. I think political will is really, really key. Number one, the most important factor we need in all this. And what maybe to just expound it a bit, political will, we need to move from rhetoric to action. I think we've talked a lot about what we need to do, what we have to do, but we've done little. So we need to move. We need to open up our borders. We need to open up our airspace. We need to trust each other and remove these restrictions of Africans traveling to other African countries. And it's all centered around political will. Thank you.
Thank you. SG?
Thank you very much. Well, I had the privilege to report to the Assembly in February, and my view is that all of the legal pieces that are required are coming together. What is missing in the legal pieces that are required to make this fully functional is movement of persons. And the protocol on movement of persons, which is critical, which has been ratified by only 4 countries in the African Union. So we have to do more politically to get more countries to ratify the movement of persons, so that the protocol on the movement of persons, so that we can complement the movement of goods with the movement of people who want to provide a service or trade in another part of the continent. It is, I made an example. My wife is American. It is easier for her to travel around Africa than for some Africans to travel around Africa.
Even the ones in charge of Continental Free Trade Area.
Precisely. Precisely. Visa-free, much easier. So we have to do more to facilitate the movement of persons, movement of business persons in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Clare. For the minister to address the head of state, first of all, you have to be able to analyze the sensitivity of what I want to say. But I will just say...
Just imagine it for once.
We assume. Let's take it as assumptions. I will tell them to be consistent. The second one will be to learn to say yes when it's necessary and to say no when it's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel. I think what we've learned today and what we already know is that the African Continental Free Trade Area is a big moment for Africa. It's a big opportunity, and it can actually transform the lives of our people in this generation and even generations to come. However, I think we still need to work on political commitment. We need to walk the talk. We need to work on the right private sector conditions. We need to address movement of people, and we need to tell our leaders to be consistent and to say yes when they mean yes and no when they mean no. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Claire, and the panel for an excellent session. You can take your seats. Thank you.